Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning, taking time out of your day. I am Genevieve Meyer, and I'm the statewide Coalition Development Coordinator for Indiana Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, which is one of the programs under Indiana Youth Services Association. So we actually have a few programs. We operate the Safe Places. You guys may have seen the little yellow triangles around the state, Make Good Decisions, the Indiana Lifeline Law, as well as the Youth Service Bureaus and a couple other programs. Today's presentation objectives. So we're going to talk about the role social media can play on targeting, recruiting, exploiting youth. And we're going to talk about the impact of social media and mental health on youth, understand IPVAP services and resources for your organization, and also talk about some resources for prevention and response to online exploitation. And then we'll briefly talk a bit about signs of online grooming and exploitation. So, caveat with this presentation, I don't know if you guys have realized, but technology is moving really quickly and it's really difficult to keep up with all of the advancements and all of the new things. We all are trying to do our best, but as the date of this presentation, there's probably going to be some other things that have changed and some things that are updated. And I will share with you where you can continue to kind of monitor that and learn more. We fortunately do have some really great resources. So, human trafficking in a digital world. I know some folks, we've talked about like dark web, or you think of human trafficking as somebody being snatched up and held against their will or kidnapped, or in the movies, there's always, a kidnapping, very suspenseful thing that happens. But in reality, according to Polaris, which is our formerly human trafficking hotline operator, 80% of human trafficking cases actually originate online. And it's not even the dark web of maybe what we think about, right? We think about like dark web and kind of seedy corners of the internet that, you and I, probably don't go to. That's where this is happening. But unfortunately, the reality is a lot of online exploitation is happening through apps that we use every day. So that's Uber, that's Airbnb, that's Facebook, Instagram. Dating apps are really, really prevalent as far as scams as well as trafficking. So it's something that, just like human trafficking in general, we're seeing is kind of hiding in plain sight. And we interact with the illicit economy quite a bit on a regular basis without not necessarily knowing. So that can be unsettling as adults, but as adults with children, or if you're a parent or guardian of a child, or if you work with youth, I think that realization can be a little more unsettling of just how much our kids interact with some of these places that could potentially be very dangerous or exploit them. So we're going to talk about some of the methods that nefarious actors use to identify youth and target them, talk about some grooming practices, and then we're going to talk about a bit about prevention, some resources, and then what I feel is one of the most important things is responding to cases of exploitation. So increased social media usage is increased, especially over the pandemic. Many of our youth were moved exclusively online, right? Everybody stayed home. So we really did see a big explosion of targeting youth online during the pandemic, and it kind of continues to grow. It also has a really detrimental mental health aspect on youth. So some of the myths surrounding human trafficking, we used to think of kind of the white passenger vans. There's been some stories about high price items online. There's the Wayfair conspiracy, wrong number text messages, the zip ties and mark windows. I know it seems like every month there's some kind of social media posts following around about, somebody got something on their car and they're being trafficked for targeting. I'm not aware of any of those things happening. I'm not saying that that hasn't happened to someone, but I'm not aware of any of those things happening. But I do know for sure what that looks like now is, back when I was a kid growing up, the mall, parks, there definitely was white passenger vans that we all were, cautioned against interacting with. We had a lot of conversations about don't take candy from a stranger and, don't get in cars with strangers and things like that. And while we still, want to have those conversations with our kids now, unfortunately, the playground is more of a digital form, right? So you have predators and people with not great intentions that do kind of congregate online, specifically in places where children are gathered and are enjoying themselves. So that's the reality of what looks like today. So here's a mother's perspective of just recognizing what trafficking exploitation is. So the question is did you know what sex trafficking was prior to your daughter becoming a victim of it? And Carrie responded that I wasn't really in tune with what sex trafficking really was. I knew it was a problem for women who are always willing participants. And did you ever think that your daughter could have ended up a victim of sex trafficking? And Carrie responded with absolutely not. I had concerns about her boyfriend's Facebook page, pictures of him alone with several women who were dressed provocatively. When I shared my concerns with a couple of my close friends, they assured me that we had raised our daughter well and she would never let herself get involved with anything like prostitution. I felt that they were probably right and dismissed my concerns as I primarily believe that women enter the industry by choice. My daughter was well educated and had been raised in a good home, so I knew that she would know right from wrong and thought that she would be able to speak for herself. I think we can all agree on here that we've all maybe made a decision that we wish we hadn't made, or maybe gone on a date with somebody that we wish we hadn't gone out with, right? Just to be human is to want to connect with other folks, to have community, to feel like you belong somewhere. There's nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, there are some folks that look at that vulnerability and instead of choosing to show up in a healthy way, choose to exploit that vulnerability. So basically what to say is there's not a particular demographic that's prone to sex trafficking. It really doesn't matter your education level, it doesn't matter, your bank account, your zip code that you live in. Where there's vulnerability, there is a potential for exploitation, unfortunately. However, there are some groups that are certainly more vulnerable than others. And one of the largest groups, with about 70%, is unfortunately our kids that are involved in the foster care system or in the juvenile justice system. And that's the reality of the situation there. If you have kiddos that, maybe one parent is deceased and one parent is incarcerated, they may not necessarily have somebody looking out for them. What I've seen in my experience working in this field is kids that tend to run away. They're either running from something dangerous, but they're often also running to something dangerous and don't really realize it yet. And so that's where the social media recruitment can come into. Nowadays, you see influencers and people online that are having these super glamorous lives, and it looks fun. It looks neat, right? And so, there may be some opportunities there that are a little too good to be true, as far as modeling contracts, becoming an influencer, getting brand endorsements and money for endorsing brands. And so, if you don't know that potentially could slip into a more dangerous territory, especially as a young kiddo that's looking for validation and a place to connect, they can find themselves in a really dangerous position. So, technically speaking, human trafficking is the use of force, threat of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into any form of work or service against their will. So there's actually 25 different business models for human trafficking. I'll touch on a few of them. I think when people think of human trafficking, they primarily think of sex trafficking, somebody that is forced, coerced, or in a fraudulent way tricked into providing sexual services for money, or maybe that money goes to somebody else. It doesn't even go to them. However, there's other forms of exploitation and trafficking as well, such as labor trafficking. So, what does that look like? Is somebody, in another country where there isn't as many employment opportunities, may see influencers and folks on social media, TikTok especially, seems to be a really prominent place where they will talk about employment opportunities in the United States. And a lot of these organizations look pretty legitimate, of, agencies that can help people leave their current situation and geographic location and relocate to the United States for gainful employment. I don't know about any of you guys, but I would have no idea how to immigrate to another country and understand the employment laws and make sure that I was doing things right. Like, I would have to find somebody that I trusted, understood that, to help me navigate that and help me make sure that I am within the law and doing everything appropriately, right? And so, unfortunately, some folks are kind of tricked or brought over by fraudulent means. And then, what looks like you're going to make $18 an hour is suddenly like, well, I'm going to hold on to your money. 5 weeks go by, you haven't got any money. You're told that you'll be provided housing. And then you find out that you're being charged for housing, you're being charged for food, you're being charged for everything. And you can't ever actually collect any money because it's all going towards your cost of living. Also, it's really common for documents to be taken. So with labor trafficking, the big thing there is, because I know sometimes it can get a little blurry, because, unfortunately we do have just kind of crummy employers that don't do things ethically. And that's more of a Department of Labor or OSHA complaint. But if somebody doesn't have freedom of movement, that's kind of the definitive line there for labor trafficking. If they don't have control of their documents and they are not able to leave after work, head into town, go see a movie, or they just have to stay in one location and they're just working, that would suggest labor trafficking. And then I would also like to just note that when it comes to sex trafficking, you do have to prove fraud, force, or coercion with adults for sex trafficking, but you do not for minors. So there's no such thing as a child prostitute. Children cannot consent to commercial sex acts. However, this is not true for labor trafficking. So if you have somebody under 18 that you suspect is a victim of labor trafficking, they do have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So a little caveat there. So what does force, fraud, or coercion look like? Well, force, I think, is pretty clear: beating, slapping, sexual assault, rape, confinement, initiation practices within gangs. Fraud is going to look like false promises, withholding wages, blackmail, extortion, lying about work conditions, preying on desperation. And coercion is threats of serious harm either to that individual or somebody they care about, such as friends and family, intimidation, humiliation, emotional abuse, controlling daily life, and just having a general climate of fear, right? If you are in a situation, say you work in a club and you have a very legitimate job, maybe you're a dancer or you're a bartender, and it just happens to be an adult themed environment. There's nothing wrong with that if that's just your choice for your position. However, if you're being asked to do things that you don't want to, and there is a possibility of one of your coworkers or one of your friends or threat of losing your employment, that becomes a climate of fear, and that becomes that's when it crosses over into potential trafficking situations. I think when we think of human trafficking, we look more on the force side of things, but in my experience and most of the research suggests that fraud and coercion is actually much, much more common in people that find themselves in these situations. So Indiana law specifically has 5 separate offenses that we can charge for sex trafficking. So we have promotion of human sex trafficking, promotion of human labor trafficking, promotion of child sex trafficking, human trafficking is also applicable to buyers. And then once again, human trafficking of a minor is considered child abuse in Indiana. So even if you have kiddos that think that they're living some kind of glamorous life, maybe they're 17 and they figured out, that they can utilize their body as a commodity, they may feel like they are doing it of their own free will. It is still legal, and that is not a thing. And sometimes this gets confused because Indiana, the age of consent for minors is 16. So if you are 16, you can consent to sexual activity with somebody of any age. There's not a minimum age there. Can be 18, can be 48. It just depends. The only caveats to that is if you're engaged in a sexual relationship with somebody in a position of authority, such as a teacher or a boss or a soccer coach or something like that, and that's a bit different. But I know sometimes that can get confusing because the age of consent for sexual activity is 16 in Indiana. Some folks may think that the age to consent to commercial sex activities is also 16, but it is not. It is still 18. I'd also like to note that individuals under the age of 18 cannot be arrested for prostitution, as there is no such thing as an underage prostitute. And I'm bringing this up because unfortunately our laws and our statutes still aren't quite up to date. And so you do have terms like promotion of child prostitution and child prostitution, which sometimes can be confusing. But ultimately, a child cannot be prosecuted as a prostitute if they're under 18. And then again, force, threat of force, fraud, or coercion does not need to be proven when a minor is trafficked for commercial sex. Also, likewise, I didn't realize they were underage is not a defense for a buyer of a child or for sexual activity. And they can be charged whether they knew that the person was a victim of human trafficking or not. So, some definitions specifically for online sexting. Sexting is getting really common. If you ask kiddos if there's sexting going on, probably if those that are brave enough to admit it, will admit to it, and then everybody else is also participating in it and probably just not disclosing that they are. It's common with adults. It's common with our younger folks. Unfortunately, we've seen, kids as young as 8, 9, participating in this activity, which is why it's really important to provide age appropriate education on this, because unfortunately, if we're waiting until kids are in high school, we have already missed the mark. Most likely they're already engaged in some of these things. So sexting is just what it sounds like, having very illicit conversations, maybe sharing images, descriptions of sexual activities, either via phone, through text messages, or direct messaging through social media platforms. CSAM, child sexual abuse material, is any visual depiction of sexually explicit conduct involving a minor, a person less than 18 years or old. And that qualifies for organically generated child sexual abuse material as well as AI generated child sexual abuse material. With the advancements of AI, some of our laws and our legislation is still working on catching up with that, but it is still, you still can face some pretty severe consequences even if it is AI generated. And then also another kind of in between space that we're unfortunately seeing a lot more of is apps that are nudifying apps. And we've seen that in some schools. I know we had a case here in Indiana that's ongoing where some kiddos, just took pictures of their regular pictures of their classmates, out of yearbooks and off school websites and used apps to transpose their face onto pornographic imagery and spread that around. And then self-generated sexual abuse material. This is also something that we're unfortunately seeing an increase of. So that's sexually explicit content created and featured by children below the age of 18. And so what that looks like is that children are sending illicit or suggestive photos that they've taken of themselves or of another person that's under 18 and then sharing those images. And that falls under the same rules and legislations as distribution of child pornography or CSAM, even if that child is under 18. So it is illegal, no matter what your age is, to share illicit images of somebody who is under the age of 18. Again, this is something that is kind of going up against the age of consent here. I've had conversations with several ICAC officers, the Indiana Crime Against Children. Those are the ones that investigate, the online extortion cases, as well as child sexual abuse material. And they are saying that images of consenting relationships are ending up on the cyber tip line, and they feel like it's not a good use of their time to investigate those cases because the subject in the pictures is 16 or 17. And so that's where that is. So if you have, 16 or 17-year-old that's in a sexual relationship with somebody who is an adult or even somebody their own age, they can be in that sexual relationship. But if they are taking illicit images, that is still considered CSAM because they are under 18. I don't believe that these pictures are accidentally ending up on the cyber tip line. I think most likely these images are being shared and possibly sold. And that's why they're ending up on the tip line. However, even if you have a 16 or 17-year-old that can legally consent to a sexual relationship, that still falls under the CSAM laws. They cannot generate explicit images and share them and distribute them. Sextortion primarily occurs online. It's generally non-physical form of coercion that are utilized, such as blackmail, to acquire sexual content, photos, videos of the child, obtain money from the child, or sexually exploit the child. This is really increasing. And if you'll notice at the bottom of the slide here, this has National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 2016. This is 10 years ago. I will say that we are all struggling to catch up with the volume and the advancement and the nuance of how this has grown just from a 6-month period to another 6-month period. So if any of you guys are like, this is like way behind, I'm aware. I'm really aware. So the internet can allow people to kind of hide who they are. Predators can make themselves appear as a completely different person. They use messaging platforms, media site, video chat applications. Grooming techniques are used. Sexual predators can offend without ever having physical contact with their victims. And I'm going to expand a little bit on this just to kind of share some of my knowledge of working in this space. The game companies and app stores really try to offer parental controls. There's applications like Bark that you can put on your kids' phones. And I need you guys to understand that those only work if the apps are rated the right age in the app stores. So what does that mean? If you put monitoring devices and child safety devices on your child's phone and you mark it as nothing over age 13, if an app is not rated age 13 and above, or it's rated, age 10, but it really has like more 13 to 17-year-old content on there, those apps are not going to catch it. They're not going to protect that child from there. I've unfortunately seen nudified apps that are rated age appropriate for ages 4 and above. That would be an example of something that is not going to be caught in those systems. So just to be aware of that. Also, when it comes to online age rating, it's kind of like the Wild West between ages of 13 to 17. There's not much of a difference as far as controlling for sexual content after you rate an app or a website as age 13 and above. An example of that, Snap and X, formerly known as Twitter, those are both rated as appropriate for ages 13 and above. Not only is there a lot of pornography on both of those apps, but also there are people that literally use them as dating apps. Snapchat, you can video call people and it shows a preview. And so I have personally experienced this on Snapchat of somebody trying to call me and the image had them handling themselves. Didn't need to see that, didn't ask for that. And I'm an adult, right? So I can only imagine what our kids are getting. So I'm just telling you this because I think it's not really well known out there, what parents are really having to navigate with this. We would hope that social media companies and gaming platforms would do a little better job of that. But so far, just with how quickly things move, that's not the case. Another thing is you look at games and you take a look at the parental controls and you're like, okay, my kid can't access a chat room. They can't have, strangers talk to them. It's only people that they know. Unfortunately, folks figure out a way to get around that. And so I don't know if you guys have heard, there's been a lot about Roblox in the news, about predators utilizing Roblox to access children. And then people are like, well, I don't see how that's possible on Roblox. Well, what it is they move them over to another platform. And then you'll also see this with young adults and adults as well. Most dating apps, it's supposed to be 18 and over. I will tell you there are a lot of teenagers that are on dating apps. So 13, 14, 15. And, that's what they do is kind of like make that initial connection. And then they will move them over to another app like WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal. And a lot of those apps have the disappearing messages similar to Snapchat. And so they're able to kind of operate with little evidence being collected of exactly the activities that they're doing there. So types of sextortion. Sexually motivated sextortion. So that is just what it sounds like. Folks are trying to get illicit images of minors for their own sexual gratification. This typically targets victims aged 10 to 17. This is not what we see the most of, I'll be honest with you. Financially motivated sextortion, this is something that I have seen jump quite significantly in the last 18 months to 2 years. So folks that aren't even necessarily interested in CSAM are understanding the financial benefits and the resale value of that and are then targeting children and minors to create sexual content that they can then sell and receive financial gain from. It's not necessarily, a sexual gratification for them. It's not even something that they're into. But unfortunately, people have figured out that this is something that they can sell in a way that they can sell it. And it's kind of an income stream. And then more alarmingly, we've seen a big increase in sadistic online exploitation. So groups like .com, 764, I feel like I'm getting that one wrong. Those are coming out. We've had 2 cases in Indiana so far of just basically these are just kind of online radicalized groups of people that come together and their whole motivation for existing online in these spaces is the degradation of society. And they have unfortunately reach out and target children specifically, either to generate sexual content online, harming pets and animals, self-harm, and we've even seen cases where children have live streamed their own suicides. So really, really chilling, really difficult stuff. That is unfortunately the reality that we're in right now. Financially motivated sextortion, I will say that those are males ages 13 to 17. That seems to be the primary target. But again, that's another area that unfortunately is growing quite a bit. Another thing with the sadistic online exploitation that personally keeps me up at night is I am seeing the people that are being discovered as the perpetrators of this and seeing them be arrested and prosecuted. And the ages of these individuals are actually pretty much children. So we're talking 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And this is the age they are at the time of arrest and prosecution. And they've been doing it for several years. So this is really children doing this to other children. Vulnerable populations to this, of course, our runaway and our homeless youth are the most vulnerable. Folks in poverty, you may have individuals that are like, hey, I cannot get my needs met. I need money and have figured out a way to either self-generate imagery or somebody has been like, hey, if you do this, I will give you money. System involvement, again, very common. Abuse, neglect, or substance abuse. Again, we also see an intersection here similar to familial sex trafficking, where you have a parent or guardian is allowing access to a child for sexual gratification in exchange for not even cash, but just drugs. Parents that have substance use issues often are not making great decisions with their children, and so this is a common intersection as well. If we have seen parents generate illicit images of their children and sell them to gain substances. Untreated mental health issues also, and this goes to the bottom as well. I think this is probably underreported and undermeasured, but physical, cognitive, emotional disabilities also is really prevalent, especially with online exploitation. Of that you have individuals, again, wanting to connect, wanting to find their people, their tribe, and they're not able to get out in the community or maybe participate in other activities that other children will be able to, but they may find a group or a community that they plug into online that meets those needs, and then unfortunately be exploited from that point. I've seen this in cases of just individuals with lower cognitive ability. They thought that they were in a romantic relationship with somebody. They didn't realize that person was recording their intimate encounters and selling them. Immigrant and migrant youth are vulnerable, and then of course refugee and asylum seeking youth are particularly vulnerable. Youth vulnerabilities in 2019 talked about sexually insecure youth and younger, less educated youth. I think this is not as prevalent today of just, unfortunately, nefarious actors realizing the potential monetary gain with explicit imagery of young children. But this definitely was an issue before the pandemic of kids are curious, right? They're curious about things, and unfortunately, there's folks on the internet that are happy to have illicit conversations with them and help them explore their sexuality in not necessarily a healthy way, and introduce them to things that they are not ready to be introduced to. So 94% of youth aged 3 to 18 have home internet service, right? If you have an internet connection, unfortunately, the world has access to your child. We've seen an increase in this, in that, children are unfortunately literally lured right out of their bedroom. This has been something that was particularly challenging with our missing and runaway kiddos, of that you had perpetrators that would meet a child through a gaming platform. We saw this quite a bit when the Oculus came out. So the VR headsets, a lot of parents didn't realize that there were ways to interact with people that you didn't necessarily know within those gaming systems. And since it's just within the child's view, unless it's projected on the screen, a lot of parents weren't realizing that their child was actually engaging and interacting with other people in inappropriate ways. These folks, they tend to congregate online in Reddit and other areas and provide guidance and how-to guides on how to exploit children, how to get children to leave their homes. Unfortunately, that is all there. But one of the things that we noticed is an increase in perpetrators coaching children to make it look like they ran away rather than somebody connected with them online and encouraged them to leave their homes, because they understood that law enforcement responded differently to missing kid cases versus runaway kid cases. So again, reiterate again, anytime a child is missing or has run away, rather it's the fifth time they've run away or the first time they've run away, we always want to consider them to be missing and endangered, regardless of what that looks like, especially in the age of online exploitation. Another thing we have too is online in rural areas, those nice, safe, comfortable communities where you don't have to lock your door, and things like this don't happen here. If you have a kid that's missing, what are you going to do? You're going to check the park. You're going to look for a secret boyfriend or girlfriend. This kid is somewhere in this rural area, right? They didn't drive off. They're on foot somewhere. They're close by, or at least that's the assumption. But unfortunately, somebody may have come and picked them up. And so by the time these cases of missing kids are taken seriously and understand that maybe they actually have been picked up by someone, there are several counties away and some harm has been done. So again, no matter where you are, if you have a child that is missing, these day and ages with technology and internet access and, sharing tactics, you always want to treat these kids as missing and endangered. Also, people share a lot of information online. I know I'm guilty of that. I raised 4 kids, back in the day with Facebook. It was great to, have the little pictures of the first day of school with your school and your teacher's name and your grade and your favorite subject, all the things. And you get to share it with the grandparents and the extended family. And it's cute. Nowadays, unfortunately, putting all that kind of stuff on the internet makes your child incredibly vulnerable, right? Because you have people who are looking for and they're identifying, oh, this kid goes to this school, this kid participates in this sports. So that's called social media engineering. And that is a big, big part of what we're seeing with online exploitation. I'm going to skip over that. Social media engineering. You have nefarious actors that will take a look at different kiddos' social media posts. They often will identify kiddos talking about like, "Oh, my parents are so rude. They took my phone away from me," or "They just don't understand," or "Please pray for my family. We're going through this really difficult time right now. My grandmother died. I broke up with my boyfriend. I'm lonely." I mean, we share our thoughts a lot, maybe a bit more than we should on social media and kiddos, especially, and even situational vulnerability. So if you have folks that, ordinarily have a pretty stable, supportive, nurturing environment, things happen, right? I mean, grandparents die, older siblings transition and move out of the home. All of these things can leave a kiddo vulnerable and looking to connect somewhere. So online recruitment from 2015, 2018, and really old data, National Human Trafficking Hotline documented 969 potential victims. I would say that that is probably an average of 30,000 a year now. So just to give you an idea of how much this has shot up and increased. So of those 969, 300 were on Facebook, 47 were on dating sites, 113 on Instagram, and 502 were on other platforms. And we do see that. We have had several cases of children being sold on platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. There's an entire trafficking ring that specifically likes to recruit girls that are involved in the foster care system and are very just used to transactional relationships. And they advertise them with coded emojis on Instagram and Facebook. Also, dating platforms, that's really popped up on there. And that's actually increased the issue there of you have lonely folks on dating app platforms that are looking to connect and maybe looking to get some needs met, and the scams on those sites are quite big. And again, it's not just adults that are on dating sites. Unfortunately, it's not a really great verification on age verification for dating platforms. And so you may have, younger individuals that are interacting with adults in sexual ways on dating platforms. Online recruitment: 55% of domestic minor sex trafficking survivors age of life in 2015 or later reported meeting their trafficker for the first time using text, a website, or mobile app. Nowadays, I would say that that is 80%. And so, for example, if you're on a dating site and you are looking for just a date, you may have chat with somebody. What they generally do is they will move you quickly over to another platform, either text messaging or WhatsApp or something. Because a lot of dating sites nowadays, they don't let you share images. And so if you're able to move to these other platforms, you're able to share images. Even better if whatever you're doing disappears immediately so you can't track it. Maybe somebody that hasn't really considered purchasing sex before, suddenly you realize that it's actually quite inexpensive to purchase sex. You're getting images of somebody that's very attractive, lighting up your whole nervous system. And you think, maybe this is something I want to try. And maybe that person is selling their services out of their own free will, or maybe that person, you're actually interacting with their person that's selling them, right? So they're flirting with you, they're sending the images, they're negotiating terms, they're collecting the money, and then you show up, and the victim doesn't really have a say in what they're doing. They have to do what they're told. So signs of grooming, of course, isolation is always one of the first ones there. Being secretive about the sites that they're visiting or who they're talking to online. If you see kiddos that are quickly exiting out of screens, going to unusual places to meet friends, or suddenly they seem to have different friends all the time. They change from week to week. Older boyfriends and girlfriends, possessing new items. Also, mysterious DoorDash. We've seen that quite a bit of kids just, generate images of themselves and then just receiving lunch from Taco Bell. Right. So DoorDash just kind of showing up there also Amazon delivery packages. Another thing to be aware of too is, folks that are really serious about that could potentially send burner phones to houses, right? So even if you're monitoring your children's devices, somebody may have given them another device that you're not aware of. Using sexual language that you wouldn't expect them to know. So suddenly we know a lot more about sex and they have access to drugs and alcohol. And of course, those unexplained changes in behavior or personality. And then also on this, many of on this call are service providers. We have some experience with sexual abuse and other things like that. In sexual abuse, the grooming process, you have a perpetrator and you have a victim. And that perpetrator will test boundaries. They will test loyalty. It's, I'm the only one that understands you. Nobody else understands you. We have this kind of secret, exclusive relationship between us. We are so special, right? And so that's kind of generally what we see generally for child sexual abuse. With trafficking, it goes a bit further out into sort of this web. So now you have this perpetrator, this child, that grooming practice, but the perpetrator is also teaching that child how to groom other children. And so sometimes we think of an adult perpetrator that is grooming a child that then traffics that child on a one-on-one basis. And we miss the larger, really unhealthy, toxic community that those children are creating amongst themselves. So online grooming, there's 4 preconditions models. When it comes to online grooming, there's motivation to abuse. So again, looking to profit, exploit others. Some are looking to make the victim trust them, open up a little more, bloom in their sexuality, as sometimes is what is called, overcome external inhibitors. How can they create a situation where there's no supervision? We see that a bit with them actually sending devices to the child. And then also getting that child to recruit other children. I'm going to pause here and kind of add on to this a little bit as we have pig butchering schemes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but one of the biggest contributing factors of why we're seeing such a drastic increase in our youth being targeted are from overseas nefarious actors that are actually sponsored by state governments that are our adversaries. So post-COVID or pre-COVID, there was places in Southeast Asia and along some coastal towns that wanted to increase their tourism. And so they built casinos. So these casinos were built pre-COVID. Governments put a lot of money into casinos and resorts along with the companies, establishing these casinos and these resorts. COVID happened. What happened? Nobody's going on vacation, right? Those casinos, those resorts didn't open. They were turned into call centers. And so what we're seeing is we're having exploited people exploiting other people on the other side of the world. And so you have folks that are being recruited from rural villages in these other countries to work in these call centers. They are then locked into those call centers, and the call centers are literally to identify and exploit American children, American teens, European children, European teens, as primarily American teens. But the people that are doing the exploiting are actually trafficked and have a quota that they have to meet, or they suffer from severe consequences, and they are literally trapped in these call centers. So just a little something to be aware of those dynamics there. So, somebody whose life is being threatened, somebody who's being promised, if you do enough of these terrible things, I will let you go. I will let you back to your family. I think you can understand just the creativity and the relentlessness that we are now seeing targeted towards our children here. We don't really understand that that's the dynamic of what's happening there. So again, groomers, they look for specific thing. They call them sad fishing. So, we're looking for kiddos that are sad, that are maybe having some mental health issues. We unfortunately see this a lot in the spaces of children that are looking for a specific avenue for support. So we may see them in eating disorder, groups where children are looking for support in overcoming eating disorders. The LGBTQIA community, of understanding and wanting to find other like-minded kids and youth and individuals to relate with and to navigate the world with. Also people with, cognitive disabilities. So just kind of these places where individuals might congregate that maybe are looking to connect in a way online that they're not able to connect out in the real world. And then of course gaming and adjacent platforms. You can game with other people all over the place. And this is like really, really popular with adolescent and young adults. Almost every adolescent young adult I know does gaming, and many of them actually create entire friend groups, right? So it's like Friday night at 8, we're all online, we're gaming, we're, talking smack, we're, roasting each other or telling jokes. And then sometimes those friend groups actually meet in places. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Especially if you're consenting adults and you all kind of meet up and you want to actually meet the people that you've been gaming with, for the past year or whatnot, and they have like this online kind of friend group community that's getting really, really big and happening quite a bit. We also are seeing this with young adults and adolescents being radicalized for terrorist groups as well through online gaming, right? So, what are we doing? We're shooting things, we're blowing things up, we're in a war zone, we have all kinds of adrenaline and things going on. And then other people are talking about maybe real life scenarios where you can shoot things and blow things up. And so we are seeing also an increase in our young folks getting radicalized and then participating in terrorist activities. Here's some grooming apps. Again, this is changes every day. So I know sometimes, I get the question of like, which apps are the most dangerous? Which one I stay away from? I will tell you, most of these are already outdated, right? And there's already new ones in that space. And I recently was fortunate enough to attend a Tech Against Trafficking Summit out at Microsoft headquarters a couple of months ago. And so public policy, safety, and legal teams of pretty much all the major tech companies all came together specifically to talk about romance schemes and pig butchering schemes and, online exploitation and all the things that happen, because you know what, this is harming their business and their platform. Like, they don't want it on here either, but unfortunately, it's just moving at such a rapid pace that everybody's having a hard time keeping up with it. So social media companies and these app companies, they are doing what they can to limit that. They don't want this on their platforms. They don't want people harmed. They want their products to be utilized and adored and preferably have people addicted to them. They don't want, negative things to be happening. That's not good for business. So you're going to have parents and caregivers with a high level of anxiety of just trying to identify where all the dangerous apps are and stay 2 steps ahead. But unfortunately, it's just not a realistic space to be in. So, what can you do about that? The big thing is have conversations with your children. So, I think in the beginning, when we were talking about online exploitation, we kind of made it similar to like the 90s DARE program for drugs of like, hey, kids, just don't do drugs. Well, kids are going to be at a party. Kids are going to be in situations. If all they've ever learned is don't do it, they may not have the tools for when they do come in contact with things or when a friend has made a choice, right? So we're really moving away from just don't do it to it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you come across someone or something online that makes you feel uncomfortable or is inappropriate. Just know that this is a trusted adult that you can talk to. That adult is going to react appropriately and be able to help them navigate through that. That was just my 2 cents there. So some examples of some social media posts that could draw attention from a predator or a trafficker, and kind of talked about all of these. And it's just an opportunity, to meet a need. Nobody understands me. I'm sick of being single. I feel ugly. Body validation. My life sucks. Somebody will show up and give them that validation and adoration that they're looking for. Transactions. So these are called peer-to-peer transaction apps. So Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, Cash App, gift cards. These are outside of the traditional banking system. Also, cryptocurrency and electronic wallets should be on here as well, which are also pretty prominent. These operate outside banking systems. You can, if you're a kiddo, there's not a lot to verify age and who you are to sign up for these. And there also can be a little bit more difficult to track as far as payments. I will say human trafficking, online exploitation, they are generally financially motivated crimes. I mean, human trafficking always is a financially motivated crime. That's literally the definition of trafficking. Online exploitation can be financially motivated, as we saw, can also be motivated by sexual gratification, right? So there's not always going to be a financial transaction in that. That being said, when you have human trafficking or financially motivated crime, you also have financial fraud, right? So there has to be some way for that money to exchange hands. Most likely, it's going to be through a peer to peer transaction app. And these are kind of the most common ones. So if you have kiddos that have access to these, this might be a spot that you want to take a look and kind of see what transactions look like there. If you have a 15-year-old client that, keeps getting like $25 from, you know, just like 15, 20 men over the course of a couple of months, that might be a red flag. So, most commonly used apps for online sex ads, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. Not real surprising there. You also can do Apple Pay, and I believe nowadays you can actually send money through different social media apps as well. So this was a case in Indiana. A New Jersey man sentenced to 15 years in federal prison after grooming minor online and transporting her across state lines via Uber for sex. So this was in central Indiana, I believe. It was a 13 or 14-year-old girl met somebody on Roblox. This guy was actually super notorious, and he started with creating kind of a hierarchy of kiddos within Roblox. And so he just kind of created this little army of kids and would give them like gifts within Roblox to just kind of elevate their status as far as players in Roblox. And then eventually would move them over to other platforms, engage in illicit activity, and give them, gifts. And so this individual actually hired an Uber to pick up a 15-year-old girl and Uber her all the way to New Jersey. So Indiana to New Jersey. I can only imagine how expensive that Uber ride was. They did actually recover the girl in New Jersey. She had been there for a few days. He denied that they participated in sexual activity, but I believe that a SANE exam was done and determined that they actually had. And this one, I don't think that it's in here, but the dad actually happened to catch the car on his Ring cam. And that's how they were able to identify the car that the child was put into and taken to New Jersey, and able to get to her as quickly as they were, because sometimes, unfortunately, it's not as quick. So, prevalence: trafficking, sexting, and self generated child sexual abuse materials. In 2020, 83% of active 2020 sex trafficking cases involved online solicitation. We also saw during the pandemic some more unique forms of exploitation. And so, since people weren't able to meet in person for things, we saw them as Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, shipped grocery shoppers, Instacart, the grocery delivery sites, Grubhub. And what it was is they would sign people up to do that work, but then keep the money or give them a very small percentage of what that money is. So again, another form of labor trafficking, right? When you're taking a significant cut of people's money or signing up as somebody else when really you're controlling those accounts. We also saw increase in drug running as well. And so what that looks like is you would have folks that worked in fast food restaurants as part of a network that had access to drugs or illicit substance. People would order things, via Uber with code words, and they would get, a Big Mac with a side of weed or whatever. So that unfortunately also is something that happens there. 59% of online victims were recruited and sex trafficking occurred on Facebook. Still very, very prevalent. That has been my experience of what I've seen. 65% of underage victims recruited online in 2020 sex trafficking cases. Sexting is very, very normalized. Image-based sexual abuse is also really prevalent, and victim blaming is really prevalent. And another thing that I want to talk about here, and I want to move over to resources. It was not illegal to share non-consensual explicit images. It was not actually against the law. Some states have had some variations of trying to pass revenge porn, but it was really, really weak. The Take It Down Act was passed and signed into law at the federal level in July of this year. It's not perfect, but it definitely is moving in that direction. And so what the Take It Down Act is it actually makes it a federal crime to distribute and upload non-consensual sexual images of someone to a third-party website or just to your friends or anything. So it is punishable in federal prison by up to 3 years, as well as significant fines. Another part of this act, which I appreciate, is if you find that you have videos or images of yourself, explicit images of yourself on an adult website, it is almost impossible, or it was almost impossible to reach somebody on that website. I mean, I don't know if anybody's tried to get a hold of an airline, but like you can't do it, right? there's no 800 numbers, nobody answers, and it was even worse, for this. So I mean, can you imagine to find out that somebody has not only, violated your privacy and shared explicit images and videos that you thought were private, but they are now on adult oriented websites and for anybody to see, and people are making money off of it. I mean, enraging, right? And you literally can't get a hold of anybody to get them taken down. So what this law is it requires adult oriented websites to have an easier way to file a report saying, hey, this is me, this is my images. I did not consent to have them on here. I need them removed. And they have 48 hours to remove them. Of course, there's been some pushback. There's some legislation in that. But as of right now, that is where the law stands. That's very new. So not everybody is aware that that's an opportunity. Also, there is the Take It Down website that I would like for you guys all to be familiar with. And the Take It Down website, what that is it's a web crawler. So every image has a hash and is basically like a serial number for those images. So if a child, this only works for children, or if the images were when the person was a child. So if you have somebody that's like 24 and there's images from when they were 16 or 17 that are out, even though they're 24, they still can access this. If it's just an image of somebody under 18, no matter what age they are now. So if a child is sexting, they're sharing illicit conversation, they're sharing illicit images, and then they have reason to believe that the images that they shared are no longer part of an intimate conversation, but may go beyond that conversation, maybe to other people in their school or the other person, they're concerned they're sharing with friends. If they have the device that they took that image on, they can go to the Take It Down website and they can have that helped get it locked and removed so that it can't be re-uploaded. Has to be the original device on the phone. They don't have to notify law enforcement. They don't have to get an adult involved. They can do it on their own. Screenshots, moving from another device to another device doesn't work as well. Not a guarantee, but basically it kind of levels the playing field, because what we're seeing, unfortunately, is it's predominantly young boys that are being targeted with this and exploited. I mean, it's scary, it's humiliating, it's overwhelming, and we are seeing a very, very strong rate of children completing suicide as a result of just feeling like they have no other option here. So make sure that you guys know about Take It Down. There are flyers that are available on National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a website. They have a QR code. I've been trying to get them in, all the schools and pediatricians' offices and whatnot, so that parents and kiddos are aware that there is a tool, a resource here to help them out. So I appreciate if you guys could share that as well. What do you do if you see child sexual abuse material online? What do you do? Do you call your local police department? Do you just get on social media and make sure that everybody else knows that this is a thing? Really, the best case scenario that you want to do, if you come across either somebody who is having illicit conversations with a child online or inappropriate conversations, sharing illicit images of themselves or soliciting images from a child, you want to make a report to the cyber tip line. You either can call the number or you can generate a report to the cyber tip line. The more information about where this is happening, super helpful. We don't want to send any actual images through the cyber tip line, but you do want to identify a platform that the conversation or the images are being shared on, usernames, time of day, any kind of information that you can capture there, and then they will take it from there. Since online exploitation does have an international component to it, if you just kind of reach out to your local police department, there may be, at the very minimum, a delay in understanding how to respond to it because we don't know jurisdiction, right? We don't know who the other person is online, what country they're in, where they're from, and generally speaking, local law enforcement sometimes is not quite sure how to handle that. But cyber tip lines are made to the cyber tip line. They are able to identify, jurisdiction and location a little quicker than local law enforcement can. They also can compare it to other cases or other reports to see if it's part of something they're already working on. If it is somebody being inappropriate with a child that does live in the state of Indiana, the cyber tip line will reach out to the Indiana State Police, who will then reach out to Internet Crimes Against Children or local law enforcement if the perpetrator is within the state. So they make sure that it's the proper jurisdiction so that local law enforcement can investigate that and prosecute that case. They also can connect the victim to services, emotional peer support for the whole family, assistance with content removal, and then also legal assistance. We are seeing a lot more lawsuits being won for parents and caregivers that are suing apps and websites and social media companies and winning. And so we're seeing some more legal assistance and resources in that space. So, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is an excellent resource if you want to learn more about online exploitation. They do issue a report every year, which unfortunately those numbers seem to keep continuing to grow. But they have the NetSmarts program, and so what that is that's a prevention education on body safety and online safety. It's age appropriate from fourth grade all the way up through college. So there are college resources as well, that talk about, job opportunities that are a little too good to be true if you're a college student. If you find yourself overserved and are concerned that images were taken of you, without your consent or being able to consent, some resources there. So it does cover early college years as well as minors. There's also video games and little kind of Sesame Street kind of videos and things that you can share with kiddos so that they can interact and learn more about staying safe online and online safety. Indiana Trafficking Victim Assistance, we are all NCMEC partners, so we all can provide training on the NetSmarts curriculum. We can provide training and technical support with Take It Down. And then also, we can provide case coordination, advocacy, legal services, support service, and mental health services. We are not a direct service provider, but we do cover all 92 counties. And we really try to identify resources across the state, cultivate those relationships so that no matter where you are in the state, if you have clients or families that you're working with, we can try and make sure that we're able to connect you with the resources that that child or that family needs if something like this has happened to them. All right, here are our resources. So we have reporting of CSAM, that's going to be the cyber tip line. If you have a child that you are concerned is being trafficked, that is going to be a call to the Indiana Child Abuse Hotline. So that's a DCS call. If you believe that child is in immediate danger, so for example, you have a child that is in your emergency room and you are pretty confident that if that child gets a release, they will possibly be trafficked or additionally harmed, that's going to be a call to law enforcement. That is a 911 call. So I always want to kind of mention that if it's an emergency active situation where a child is potentially going to be harmed immediately, this is a 911 call, not necessarily a DCS call. I'd like to remind everybody that everybody is a mandated reporter, whether you're a professional or a stay-at-home mom. You are a mandatory reporter for child abuse. It is not your job to investigate it. It's not your job to substantiate it. But if you suspect, we would rather rule it out and have it be nothing than to miss an opportunity to intervene with a child who is being abused. So again, that's going to be the DCS hotline, that 1-800-800-556 for child abuse and child trafficking. If you have an adult victim that is looking for resources or looking for help, or you think there's a trafficking situation, you can call the human trafficking hotline. There's an extra 8 in there we need to fix, but that is the 1-373-7888. Also, online removal for image-based sexual abuse material of children. That's going to be Take It Down, a website that we talked about. There is some options great as the ones for kiddos, and they tend to be internationally focused. So that's the stopncii.org. So again, if you have image-based sexual abuse contact out there that you would like to see if you can get help removed, that might be an option for you. Also, resources for survivors, the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, of course, IPBAP, and then I think all of you guys, if you're in a space where you're working with kiddos, be familiar with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which operates the cyber tip line, Take It Down, as well as Missing Kids, right? So all those Missing Kid posters, it's the same organization. I'm just doing different things depending on what you need. And then also FBI also has a training program that's a little like it's only like 30 minutes, but sometimes I send that out to teachers and educators. It's a little more briefer, but kind of touches on like, hey, the internet maybe isn't as safe as we would like it to be. Here's some ways to keep yourself safe. Here's kind of some information that might want to reconsider sharing because these might be the consequences of oversharing information. So FBI also has them, and it also talks a bit more in depth about currently, what kind of scams and things are going around there. So you can sign up for that if that's something that you would like to stay more atop on, and that'll kind of get dropped in your inbox of when kind of new scams or extortion are kind of being covered or any trends are happening. You can have that delivered right to your inbox. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and move over to questions.
And so the first question was So we had gotten some examples of different kinds of apps. Thank you very much for sharing that. A question was, what are some examples of Nudify apps? Or like, are they AI programs that are doing this? I guess just a little bit more explanation for people that might not be familiar with what that is.
Sure. So 100% they are notified apps. And so there are some janky apps, and you see them kind of come and go on platforms because they're not great apps and the platforms don't really want them on there. But Nudify apps is AI generation. So just similar to if you're going to use Grok or ChatGPT to create an image, and it specifically will create illicit images. And so it either can be from a celebrity or if you have an image to upload, again, a lot of these are foreign based apps, and so they kind of come and go. So the names change on the App Store platforms. But in any given time, you can kind of take a look on there and see what different ones pop up there as well. And then also, just AI generation and also chatbots. So not even images, but unfortunately, we're seeing chatbots where you think your kiddo is interacting with Elsa. I mean, if you have a 4-year-old that adores Elsa and you can, have this app where they feel like they're having a personal conversation with Elsa, that would like blow their mind, right? But as a parent, you find out that Elsa is talking about things that are really inappropriate for your child. That's kind of horrifying. So we're seeing both in the AI space of both Nudify apps, and also, generating images as well as illicit conversations and information that are not appropriate for children.
I've also recently heard of parents dealing with an issue with Roblox where it's now starting to use AI powered age verification. So it's aging kids to be older beyond the age of parental controls, removing the chat restrictions to talk to adults on the platform. So parents can get locked out from changing them. There's like a setting and it will tell you, like, you just changed your age. It can't be adjusted for a certain amount of time. So that's, I guess, something else to look out for. I didn't know if you were familiar with that, but I know that you had mentioned Roblox specifically as a platform a number of times.
Yeah, I am not familiar with that happening. I'll look into it. I know I have a 17-year-old that constantly is in here trying to prove me wrong that the internet's not as dangerous and it's banned from Roblox quite a bit. Thanks for there. So that's something that I'm not familiar with. I have seen, in a response to some of this media coverage of like, hey, your kids are really not safe on these platforms, but we still need your money. Meta and other things have rolled out specific, advertisements about keeping your team safe online and whatnot. And again, great intentions, but I mean, technology is just moving so fast that it's really hard to keep up. So just kind of caution with, a false sense of security there. It's just unfortunately the age we live in.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Madeline. What does it look for parents to appropriately monitor children's usage of internet and social media?
Sure. So, I mean, just appropriately monitoring, right? So, like, what devices are your kids on, understanding the apps that they're utilizing. And that can look different for different families. I know some families are like, you can have 4 apps on your phone at a time because that is all I have the bandwidth to understand how apps work, right? And if you want a different one, then you're going to have to, remove one. So, just kind of 4 at a time. Again, keeping devices out of children's bedrooms at night, so when it's bedtime, the devices get turned off and they get stored in a place where parents can make sure that they're not picked up. So definitely not having devices in your children's bedrooms. And even if they aren't, exploring things online that they shouldn't be, it's so tempting to stay up way past your bedtime, watching funny cat videos or whatnot. And so that's just kind of a good, sleep habit. And, kiddos, especially adolescents, they really need their rest. I know as a parent, I raised 4 kids kind of coming up in this space. And my husband and I, we had 2 routers for the internet. So we had one for kiddos and one for us. And so one router would get shut off at 10 p.m. and you couldn't access the internet. But parents, if maybe we wanted to stay up a little later and watch Netflix, we were able to. And so that was kind of something that worked well for our family, but definitely not having devices there. But ultimately, you can't be with your child all the time, right? They're going to go to school, they're going to go to sleepovers, they're going to with friends' house, they're going to have access to other things. So again, having that conversation with your kiddo of like, I am aware that there are strange things that happen on the internet and strange people that may reach out to you. If this happens, you're not in trouble, you're not doing anything wrong, but I need you to, come and tell me right away. Similar to what we talked to with kiddos about body safety. If somebody is asking you to keep secrets from your parents, talking to you or touching you in an appropriate way, I'm here for you. And then also as parents, your reaction really is everything, right? Because as much as we would like to bubble wrap our kids, the world is out there, right? And so, make sure that when something happens that's scary or makes you angry, that you are communicating with your kiddo, you're trying to remain calm. Make sure that that child knows that you are angry, that this person has either shared, images with your child that you weren't ready for them to see, or inappropriate conversations that you were not ready to have with them again. Make sure that that child knows that you are not angry with them. You are angry with this person that over there, and I think it's good to tell children, like, you should be able to explore the world around you. You should be able to meet decent, kind people that want the best for you, right? This people that don't want to, that is not your fault, right? And that's not how the world should be. But unfortunately, it is how it is. And so just, letting your kiddo know that they haven't done anything wrong, even if they've maybe been curious or in spaces they maybe shouldn't have been, you know, just be that ally, that trusted adult, and understand that, most likely they're humiliated, they're embarrassed. Even if we're going through things because we need to find out what happened because, due to their safety, it still is a massive invasion of privacy, right? It is absolutely humiliating. So, keeping that in mind when you're responding.
As a just follow-up question to that on the subject of privacy, I know there's lots of debates of like, should parents actually like go through kids' phones or look at their messages or like read things or like, like what level of monitoring is appropriate as far as like trying to respect the child's need for privacy and autonomy while also like so if you have anything to add on that point.
Sure. Well, I think that's going to be age appropriate, right? So if you have younger kids that are, 9, 10, 11, like, I'm going to go through your stuff at any time, you know? But I mean, have that conversation beforehand, right? Not later when you're suspicious or when things are scared, right? So, like, when you introduce an electronic device to your child, have that conversation about what responsibility looks like, what appropriate behavior looks like, and let them know that, at this age with this space, you do not have privacy. I'm going to be monitoring, who you're talking to. Similar to, your kids, like, you're going to just have your kid leave the house whenever and not ask them where they are and who they're with, right? It's the same content there. When you have kiddos that are getting a little older, 14, 15, 16, 17, when maybe they are having, interested in romantic relationships, exploring partnerships and boyfriends, girlfriends, things like that, you don't want to humiliate your child. And you want them to be able to explore that in healthy ways. So again, conversations, but the NCMEC website, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, there actually is some guides for parents on there on how to have these sometimes uncomfortable conversations. But again, age appropriateness, your child, the children that you work for. And have those conversations similar to your basic sex education and drugs and all the other conversations that we need to have with our kiddos.
Thank you.
And we got another question in the chat earlier from Linda. Is there a place that we can go to learn about the cases that Indiana is working with so that we can be aware and updated on the latest information?
Sure. So, FBI Indianapolis, you can follow. I find it more on social media than just on the website, but they generally are pretty good about their press releases. If there's any kind of child exploitation cases, most likely the FBI will be involved with them within Indiana. And so, after those cases are adjudicated and information can be shared, they're pretty good about putting out those memos and press releases. So, you can check out specifically the Indiana FBI website. They have, their own website separate from just the FBI in general. Also, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Sometimes they have state specific of like, this is what's happening here. So that's another place to follow. I do see it kind of pops up a little more on social media, a little more easier to find on like Facebook and X and Instagram when they talk about cases. And then, yeah, so just kind of those two spaces if you want to kind of stay up there. Now, keep in mind, some of these are large international organized crime networks. And so you may kind of hear some whispers or things about things and not necessarily see a memo or see it released publicly because that case is still being worked.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Linda says thank you. Thank you, Genevieve. And I wanted to be sure to ask, if you or your organization have any events coming up any, other virtual trainings, I wanted to be sure to ask about that so that everyone could be aware of it.
Sure. So, with FAP and our coalitions, we have 6 coalitions across the state and 2 task force that have ongoing trainings. And we actually have a lot coming up specifically for this topic. So, June is Internet Safety Month. And so, we'll be partnering, our coalitions will be partnering with our school systems and our youth serving organizations, as well as Internet Crimes Against Children. FBI and US Marshals. US Marshals is often who helps in recovering missing kids. You guys are aware of that. And so we'll actually be doing some community awareness events and additional trainings, specifically on online safety in the month of June. So if your organization would like to make sure that they're part of that or make sure it's happening in your area, definitely reach out to me. Also, if you would like to be plugged into a coalition or you want to learn if you have a coalition or a task force in your area to be plugged into, again, feel free to reach out to me. And if you do have one, I'm happy to plug you in with that. And then ultimately, we partner and coalition partners partner with law enforcement and our NCMEC officers on a pretty regular basis. So if you would like to host a training, we certainly can do that for you.
Such